Spectrovision Radio.
Hey guys, Jordan here. I want to let you know that as of today, paid subscribers over on our Substack will get access to what we're calling an epilogue after every episode. Basically, after we've covered all the planned material for the week, we'll leave the mics on for 30 minutes or so and sort of just hang out and keep talking. We're putting these epilogues behind a paywall for two reasons. First, we know the thing some of you want most is longer episodes, so hopefully this scratches that itch. Second, this might surprise you, but there are actually a lot of things we're careful not to talk about in our regular weekly episodes. If we know our conversation won't be public, we don't have to be so careful. If you want to know what that's like, head over to godsghostsufos.com or just hit the link in the description. And once again, you can do that for free with a 7-day trial. All right, enjoy the show.
Welcome to Gods, Ghosts, and UFOs, the biggest podcast in the universe where we talk about all the things they said weren't real. What do you think about that? My name is Tom, and I'm joined by my pals and co-hosts, Mallory and Jordan. Hello, friends.
Hello.
And today we have a special guest, Mark Turner. Mark is a conscientious explorer, remote viewer, and experiencer who's had a lifetime of, let's just say, unusual experiences. A veteran of the U.S. Navy, Mark volunteers at Duke's Rhine Research Center and various other civic organizations. By day, he works in the software industry. At night, he sings in a rock and roll cover band. But the reason he's with us today is to talk about everything having to do with remote viewing. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. And in the show notes, we'll put various places where you appear on social media so people can, I don't know, stalk you there without us as the intermediary. I wonder if you'd start by describing remote viewing and your relationship to it.
Yes. Well, like a lot of people who listen to late night talk radio in the 90s, I was an Art Bell fan, listened to that show, and I heard, various guests come on talking about remote viewing. And the thing about Art Bell is that he was always selling some kind of snake oil, right? Like gold or survival stuff. And, you always had to take it with a grain of salt. But occasionally he'd have some people on that sounded like they were telling the truth about stuff. And so I thought about it, and I heard one guy come on, Joe McMonagle, who was a former Army intelligence officer who was in the remote viewing program. And I'd heard that he had actually earned the Legion of Merit for the work he did there. And having been in the military, I knew that they don't just give those things out like candy. He must have done something really impressive to earn that kind of medal. So when I found out that he was coming to the Rhine, probably early 2000s or so, to give a remote viewing workshop, I thought, well, I got to show up to this and find out what was going on. So he came to Durham. He did like a 2-day workshop on remote viewing and blew my mind. I mean, I haven't been the same since.
I love that you have that experience of going to a 2-day workshop and having your mind blown, where I feel like so many people hear about remote viewing and they maybe listen to a 1-hour conversation with someone and then dismiss it out of hand, like, oh, it's not real. And you spent 2 days actually listening, and at the end of it, you're like, this is a thing that I need to learn more about. I love that.
Yeah, it wasn't just listening, it was doing, and I'd had an open mind about things. It's one thing to take somebody's word for it. It's another thing entirely when you sit down, you draw something or write something that you absolutely know there was no other physical explanation of how you knew it. It came to you, and that really sells it to you. So there's a threshold there where he's like, oh yeah, I believe you. But when you do it for yourself and you see that it works, totally different ballgame.
Can you give us an elevator pitch for what remote viewing is?
It is a method of gaining information outside of normal time or space constraints, basically, non-physical senses. So your subconscious knows the answers to these things, and there's a lot of theories as to honestly how it works. And I don't think anybody really knows for sure exactly how it works, but we do have proof that it does work. And anybody can learn how to do it. Everybody has some sort of skill. It's just a matter of figuring out how to quiet your mind and tune in to the information and trusting it, to be honest.
What are the different ways, the different modes, if you were going to try to lay those out for people? Like, is it always something that's an image? Do people hear sounds? Is it through dreams? If you could give us a better sense of the landscape.
Sure, very good question. It's called viewing, but it's not. Viewing is really only just a small part of it. And I talked about this. I run the Rhine Remote Viewing interest group every month. I give people some targets and we practice it. So I tell the new people that it is really just, there are only like 2, maybe 3 main rules for remote viewing. Number one, it has to be intentional. So it's not something like you're washing the dishes and something pops into your head. It doesn't work quite that way. You have to have some intention to sit here and get information. The other part is you have to be totally blind to the target. You can't know anything about it. So those 2 things might sound a little bit contradictory, right? So how can you intentionally find out something that you can't know anything about? There's a way that we use coordinates sort of as a stand-in for the target, and your subconscious somehow connects that random number to the target, and you pull that information down that way, and your conscious mind never finds out anything other than that series of random numbers. It's spooky, but it works.
Why do you think that you have to not know anything about the target in order to get the information about it?
There's a part of our mind called the ego, and it often wants to jump in and get the answer to the question. It always wants to be right? It wants to say, hey, I know what that is. You know, if you found something pop in your head, it's round, it's reddish looking, part of your mind or your ego might jump in and say, I know, it's a basketball. Well, it might be a pumpkin, right? And your ego and your imagination will kick into gear if it knows just even the slightest information about the target. You know, in a lab situation, you want to be double blind. Nobody in the room has any idea what the target is, because you could also fall victim to what they call reading the person in the room, little facial tics or recognition or anything. If anybody in the room knows anything about the target, then you could be giving away clues that you could pick up on. And again, your imagination could kick into overdrive and totally ruin the session.
The first time I heard anything in depth about remote viewing, I think, was when the guys at Astonishing Legends were talking about it and interviewing someone who teaches it and learned from, a remote viewing ascended master. And she said very plainly, you don't have to have any psi abilities at all or believe that you do. And in fact, a lot of the people that tend to be or turn out to be the best or the most accurate at remote viewing think that they don't have any psi abilities at all. Does this conform to your understanding and experience?
It does. And actually, early on when remote viewing was being studied and developed over at SRI International by Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, they brought in somebody who just happened to work at SRI, who was a photographer, and she was actually supposed to be like the control. So we're going to set you down and see how just a normal layperson does with this. Well, it turns out Hella was an extremely good viewer and wound up being one of the best ones. And it could be because she has that creative, artistic mind that she was able to put things together and work with it. You know, we talk a lot, I guess, about left brain, right brain sort of, so being that she was more of a creative type, I think she was probably more open to that kind of intuition and stuff that came in. But yeah, you don't actually have to consider yourself a psychic. And some of the frameworks that have been developed for remote viewing are actually meant for everyday people who don't consider themselves psychic to learn how to do it. And there's a trick actually that is kind of accomplishing when it does that.
Which is?
Wait, what is?
I was going to wait for you to ask.
Go.
Yeah, okay.
Keep going.
So it is like if you're doing what they call controlled remote viewing, which was like the main framework for it, it kind of gives your left brain something to do, keep busy with while your right brain gets the information. So it kind of sort of keeps that part of your ego that's popping up and saying, hey, I know the answer. You can sort of focus it on, well, okay, that's nice, but we're working on colors right now, or we're working on, senses or textures or something. So you can sort of focus that left brain part of your mind into doing the busy work while the information comes in through your right mind, your right brain. That is. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I have actually tried doing remote viewing just a few times with the RV tournament app, and it was just a colossal failure for me. I think the only thing I learned from it was that my ego is so strong. And I think I have a really hard time quieting that part of my mind or something, which makes sense to me. So I would personally be very interested in practicing this, even just for the sake of like learning what a quiet mind feels like that could receive that kind of information, if that makes sense.
While we're on the topic of right brain, left brain, and you brought up an artistic right brain, you brought up creativity. They say that children are like creative masters. That if we could all be more like children, we'd all be creative all the time. Is this something that you've looked into with children as well?
Yes, kids are generally pretty good at this because they don't know it's not supposed to work, and so they just do it. You know, what's that saying? Never interrupt somebody who's doing the work by telling them it doesn't exist or something. I don't know. I'm totally butchering the quote, but you know the one I'm talking about, right? Yeah, kids are totally open to this, and they usually do well with their sessions.
I mean, as far as knowing a target, they're going to have less. They're obviously going to have less ego online, but also less familiarity with anything than an adult would. So it seems like they would be the prime candidates for it. But I could see there probably being some drawbacks as well, and then child labor issues.
Yeah, probably so.
Just don't pay them.
That's right. But you know, they do enjoy this. I've tried to show my kids how to do it, and they were a little bit reluctant. But there was one time a few years ago when my son said, "Okay, I want you to demonstrate it for me." And so I sat down at the table with my friend, and let me tell you, that was probably one of the most nerve-wracking sessions I did, because if I can't prove it to my son, who's sitting right here, then I've failed as a dad, right? So, but I actually wound up getting a really good session there. And to this day, he still is like, "Dad, how did you do that?"
Okay, tell us the story. What was the thing you...
I wanted him to give me a target. He could pick anything he wanted. And the way we kept it blind is that he would make a printout of whatever it was he had, you know, picture or something, and put it in a manila envelope where I couldn't see anything about it, right? So it was completely opaque. And I kind of had the feeling, knowing him, that it was going to be some kind of tricky sort of thing. It wasn't going to be your usual target. So sat down, I start writing down things. I'm going, okay, this is weird. And I drew this picture of, you know, the anonymous character, you know, the mask and everything that people sort of walk around with now. Yeah.
Guy Fawkes.
Guy Fawkes. Yeah, it's Guy Fawkes.
Sure.
So I started drawing that, and I drew X's for the eyes, and something just seemed really weird about that. I was like, there's something weird with these eyes. And after about 5 minutes, I'm thinking, I have no idea what this is. I'm a failure. I put my pen down, and I say, okay, show me what's in the envelope. And he pulled out a picture, and it was the presidential portrait of John F. Kennedy, only my trickster son used Photoshop to replace his eyes with little bitmaps of his mouth. So it was just like nothing but it's a really spooky picture of JFK with no eyes. And somehow I got that, and he was just as impressed as I was. I think maybe slightly less. I was going, phew, you know. If I do a session for the President of the United States, it won't be as nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
As doing work for my own son.
Perhaps you'll indulge a sort of exploitative follow-up. We're, you know, in the interest of running an entertaining program here. What is the most astonishing firsthand experience you've had with remote viewing?
Well, you know, the first time when you see that you've done something, obviously leaves quite an impression on you. And actually, during that weekend, one of the first really mind-blowing things was when Joe randomly picked the target after we had viewed it. He used a die, rolled a die on the table. The number came up, pulled open the envelope, and it was the picture that people drew. To me, that blew my mind. Like, okay, time doesn't work the way we think it does, because we just did something in the future. When I was tasking my Rhine remote viewing group once, I gave them a target of a idyllic-looking island out in the middle of the ocean, nice green. It was a volcano, actually. And I wanted to see what they picked up from it. So these people are just some of them are trained, some of them are just like everyday people who've just started trying remote viewing, but the results they came back were really shocking to me. They drew pictures of fire and split earth, like a hole in the ground and everything. And this was actually around the time that the Cumbre Vieja volcano in the Canary Islands was having a swarm of earthquakes. And it looked from all these results like this wasn't the idyllic volcano that I had tasked. It was an erupting volcano. And a few weeks later, that volcano that hadn't erupted in like 50 or 75 years came to life and started spewing out lava, and they had predicted it. It was wild.
Emerson and I went to the Rhine Center Sci Games, I guess, Sci Weekend several months ago, and, you know, we sort of shuffled from one event to the other. predictive dice rolling and stuff like that. And we got into the remote viewing room, which was way too warm and way too full. And I'm like, man, am I going to suck? I don't believe that I have really any significant psychic abilities. I also have a condition called aphantasia where I don't have a mind's eye. I literally can't see pictures when I close my eyes, which I didn't realize that, that was a minority of the population until later, and now I feel gypped. Regardless, I'm like, how am I going to see anything? And so I started the remote viewing. I had a couple of ideas, and I was like, I don't know, that doesn't feel right. This is derivative or something. So I started second guessing myself. Towards the end of it, I'm like, don't second guess anything, because it's the difference between writing and editing, right? And the mantra for a writer is, right now, edit later. The editing brain, the thing that wants to name something, the thing that wants to work on the thing you've already created, what my friend, the producer, Mike Napolitano, calls like the 1 to 10 brain. Can't do 0, but can do 1 to 10. No, you're working at 0 right now. And so it turns out I had 9 hits on what I drew. And the guy's like, what's your name? And I was like, I've arrived. So that, nice. But so much of what you're talking about dovetails so neatly with what it is that we talk about. That is to say, trust your gut, use your discernment, use your intuition, trust that voice, pay attention to that. You have information available to you that's not going to be the product of your own 5 senses.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people may not be aware of the fact that a ton of the work done with remote viewing was done by the United States military and the CIA. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, your taxpayer dollars paid for this research, and that's why a lot of it is available online. All the documentation from the unclassified documentation can be found on the CIA's website. So one of the things a lot of people get wrong is that they see these documents on the CIA site and they think it was a CIA program, when in actuality the CIA only had it for a few hours before they killed the program right at the end. So they wound up having all the archives, but how it started was back in the early 70s. A man named Skip Atwater, I think was a captain at the time in the Army for the Army intelligence, had read some of the open source intelligence. The Soviet Union back then would publish these things, and our intelligence agencies love to read all the stuff that's going on there, getting whatever information they can. So there was a story that ran in the Soviet Union journal that talked about their psychic program, how they were doing this mind reading thing. And they didn't really call it remote viewing then. The Russians were spending $20 million plus a year on this program. And the U.S. military knew well enough that the Russians aren't going to spend money on something without any kind of benefit. So there must be something to this. So the Army said, we've got to figure out how we're vulnerable to this. Like, what are they finding out about us? How can we protect ourselves from it? And so that's how the American remote viewing program got started. It was not really a counterintelligence program, but they call it OPSEC or COMSEC, where we're basically just protecting ourselves from the threat that might be out there, trying to ascertain what we can find out. So they went to SRI, found some scientists there who would be willing to start the program up, and then they found a psychic who was living in Greenwich Village, New York City, named Ingo Swann. He was an artist, ex-Army guy, and at the time he was doing some experiments with the American, I forget the name of the group that he was with, but very famous psychological organization in New York. But what they were doing with him is he was sitting in a room and they were asking him to see something that was locked away in the room next to him. And after multiple trials, he got really bored with this and said, why are you asking me to see something that's like 10 feet away when I can see anywhere around the world? And just as an example, he sat there at the desk and he described this woman who was walking outside of the building. She was wearing some kind of like orange coat or something. And they looked out and sure enough, there she was. So he had found out about the research that Hal Puthoff was doing at SRI. He wrote them a letter. They said, come on out. They tested him. And then the three of them basically developed remote viewing out there at Stanford. And so that's how it got started.
Yeah. Well,
no, I mean, that's really useful because you can go down that rabbit hole and you can get so much information and you can kind of get lost in all the details. So actually, that's the most helpful and condensed version I've heard, which I appreciate a lot. So I'm just imagining, I don't know actually among our listeners how many people there are who are kind of just like, it's not real. But I'm interested in, even just for myself, kind of like some of the questions that naturally crop up in my own mind and then what I imagine, sort of like the voice of the debunker in the back of my head who's like, yeah, well, what about this or what about that? And the first thing that always comes to mind is the knowledge that like our world is built on secrets. It's kind of how statecraft works. It's like who gets to know what when is how the entire thing functions, especially when you're talking about defense and we were talking about the conflicts between nation states. And so I wonder how any of that survives if remote viewing is real, right? And my response right now is that there just aren't enough people who accept it or use it or are aware of it or even willing to accept or believe that it's true. And so as long as that's true, the world can continue to function in the way that it has with the sort of state secrets being kept. But really, it sounds so stupid, but it's like, why wouldn't one of the first things you think of, if this is the first time you're ever hearing about this, you might be like, well, why not win the lottery? Like it's things that, because it's not time bound. And so theoretically, any of this should be possible. Theoretically, there should be no secrets, right? So how do you answer that?
Mark, you've tried the lottery thing, right, with your dreams before?
Yes,
right?
yes. I had some success with that. But to go back to Jordan's question.
Sorry, wait a second. you can't say, I had some success with that.
All right, fine. Okay. So it wasn't remote viewing per se, but I was doing a little bit of lucid dreaming practice, which is a highly psychic state of consciousness. So this is probably 2006 or so. I was having a couple of lucid dreams, really getting into it, and I could talk a whole lot about that. Highly recommend people learn how to do this.
1 second. Yes, that is going to be the follow-up episode with you pretty soon, because lucid dreaming is a very, very important topic to me, so I would love to.
Do we need to do at least an entire ep on the Monroe Institute, right?
Well, yeah, for sure.
I was actually thinking about going there and just subjecting myself to whatever week-long thing.
I just want to take advantage of the fact that Mark basically just volunteered himself to talk about lucid dreaming.
Mark Turner, friend of the show.
Yeah.
That actually means.
I'm sorry. I very abusively cut you off, Mark. So please continue with where you were.
But Jordan, does that mean we should save our questions? Because I have so many questions
about lucid dreaming.
Yes, I do.
Yes, I think
we should save.
Okay,
we should
I can do that.
Okay.
But Mark, I'm really excited to talk to you about dreams. I have lots of dreams.
Okay, but what about hey, can you abuse the system of inquiry for personal gain?
Yeah, well, you absolutely can. Absolutely can. And there's actually a group of remote viewers who go out to Vegas on a regular basis. And they have a conference there, and you listen to remote viewing luminaries, and in between the talks, you actually work some targets. Now, the way you the way you do wagering with remote viewing is called associative remote viewing, ARV. You'll hear that a lot, and that is where you have two outcomes that are sort of mapped to various things. Let's say, I'll give you an example. I bet on a baseball game when I was out there. And first you work a regular remote viewing session, but you have a judge at the table who looks at the results. And your tasking is describe the photograph you'll be shown at the end of the event. So in this case, it was a baseball game. And I know that somewhere in the future, there's a picture that I'm going to see. So I sit down. I don't know anything about the target. They say, just describe the picture you're going to see at the end of the session. So I started sketching, and I had some words pop into my head. And my little 8x10 piece of white paper suddenly has this dark sort of landscape-looking thing. There's a streak of black sort of running from left to right and feels kind of barren. I had some reddish that I'd put on the top, and I had no idea what this was all about. And going back to talking about how you succeed early on, you really do have to trust that you don't know anything about it and not try to filter like you were talking about, Tom.
Name it, don't name it.
Some of the best remote viewers I know have no filter at all and will tell you what they think about you. They just, whatever's in their head. And those are great remote viewers because they never try to edit that stuff. So anyway, have no idea what I've got here, turn it in, and my judge at the table looks at it and says, Mark, I think this might be worth you going down and putting some money on. So I'm like, okay, fine. I don't know how gambling works at all, right? I'm totally new to this, but the whole group goes down to the sports betting table. I put like $250, emptied out my wallet, all I had left, and said, okay, this is going to be the results of the game. And what it was the over-under for this one particular baseball game. Okay, and I think the number was 9 runs. There was only going to be 9 runs in the whole game. So I put the money down. I have to wait like 2 hours before the baseball game gets started. So we all go up to our hotel rooms. I'm watching TV. The very first inning of this game, there were 8 runs. The very first inning. I'm going, oh my God, there goes all my money, right? I mean, and they said it was a good session that I had done. So I was just like hanging on every, and somehow the defense tightened up in the game and they wound up with 8 runs was the total for the game. And 9 would have pushed me over. So I was so excited at the end of the game. I went back down to talk to my judge and I said, I want my feedback, damn it, right? Show me my picture. And he pulled out the photograph that was in the envelope, and it was a picture of the Northern Lights. And it perfectly matched the picture that I had drawn. And he was absolutely right. It was an outstanding session, and I had basically killed it. And I got another, I doubled my money minus the VIG or something. So about, $225, $30 off that particular thing. It works.
Do you find that honing this ability is more or less like using a muscle? In other words, the more time you devote to it, the more sort of, okay. And
absolutely,
where would you direct? So if there are listeners out there who are like, oh, why not? Mm-hmm. What if we want to have a remote viewing game with our friends instead of playing Monopoly this weekend? Like, how would you, where could they go to get resources on how to learn and work at their own remote viewing abilities?
Sure. There's a group called the International Remote Viewing Association, which is at irva.org. They're very reputable. They sort of try to uphold the standards, and they've got a couple of introductory remote viewing pages on their website you can go to, and they also have a target engine, so you can click on a button and it'll show you a random photograph. It'll show it to you after, I guess, you get the coordinates, but you can use that to practice. Now, there are a lot of people out there that are shilling remote viewing training, and a lot of people call remote viewing what they're doing, even though it's something wildly different. But if you go to IRVA and check out their website, you can find reputable instructors and resources and things. Now, I also volunteer at the Rhine, and like I said, every month we do practice sessions in our sessions. So I'll pick 2 targets, and anybody with any kind of skill level is welcome to join. It's free for Rhine members, and we usually have a good time. And like I said, sometimes we have some amazing results like that volcano incident I talked about earlier.
We've talked about the Rhine Institute before, and we'll talk about it again, which is the legendary institute at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, which has been studying, the clairs, the 5 clairs, clairvoyance and clairaudient, all that stuff for damn near a century, and have produced an extraordinary amount of data on that, a significant portion of which stands outside any sort of occurrence by chance. And it's just that the literature is not really known. Hal Puthoff and his colleague Russell Targ, published a paper on remote viewing in 1974, where they did a lot of research under strict clinical protocols. And again, extraordinary results. And it's not that people denied it or said that they were lying. It's just that it just never pierced the veil of mainstream materialist scientific understanding.
I have a hunch that one of the reasons that people tend to dismiss it out of hand is not even because they don't want to believe in it or because they're afraid of it or any actual sort of reason. It's more like there's a lack of interest. It's almost like it just slides off of a lot of people. It's almost like a shoulder shrug is what gets it sort of, into the back of the mind and then gone, right? So I wonder, and this to me, I think would maybe be me answering my own question about, the what about ... right? Like state secrets, the lottery, blah, 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 like what your ex is up to, like all the things that people might be really interested in finding out about if they had a secret magical way of finding out about anything they wanted to find out about. So I would like to go back to that question because I don't think I gave you an opportunity to actually answer it and see what your thoughts are there.
There's no known limitations to remote viewing. So your theory that secrets might not exist, I think, is a fairly accurate one. There's probably nothing out there that somebody knows that I couldn't find out.
Okay, so. Okay.
Not me personally, but as a remote viewing
That's amazing.
Well, okay, yeah, I mean, it is amazing. It is amazing. But it's also, but again, that's like something that's like, I'm either, like, that's a big razor, right? Like, I'm either going to be like, okay, and then I have a lot more questions, or I'm going to be like, nah, I don't believe that. So if I buy that theory, which I think I believe, but there's got to be a reason then why I can't, like, how is this in our rabidly consumerist, monetized society, how is this not, You know what I mean? Like, how is there? Is it because there are so many people who are, faking it? Is there because like people just think they're going to get duped? Like, how is there not somebody who can kind of prove, demonstrate that they can do this, and then like make a lot of money off of just giving people the information that they're most desperate for? And I'm talking about like not only the lottery numbers, but I'm talking about like, I don't know, ancient history, like stuff that people would love to know about, things that are just lost to the sands of time.
Yes, Stephen Schwartz is one of the early remote viewer pioneers. He lives out in Washington State, I believe, and he did remote viewing archaeology back in the 70s, where he called it the Alexandria Project. So he tasked some remote viewers like Ingo Swann and Hella Hammond to help find one of these lost cities in Egypt. And they sent an archaeological team out there and actually uncovered it exactly where they said it was. So it's pretty impressive, right? Remote viewers.
It is. It's very impressive, Mark. It's very
huge.
impressive.
It's huge. But and also you can get tasked with historical figures. And you can have conversations with them in your mind with these historical figures, and they can answer questions. And sometimes this is a cool thing. It's never happened to me. There's something called bilocation in remote viewing where you get sucked into the scene where it is like you are actually there, like a lucid dream, but in person. So if you did a session on like Custer's Last Stand, for instance, you could find yourself being right in the middle of the bullets and arrows. And that's generally not something you want to do in like an operational remote viewing session, because the idea is that you're recording the information, you're sharing the information as it's happening. But when you get sucked into it like that and by location, it's like your whole attention is there. And generally, you kind of want to balance it out. So, yeah, there are all kinds of really interesting things that could be done with this and are being done with this. And I think it's slowly catching on. You talk about why isn't everybody doing this? I think if you go to the remote viewing subreddit, on Reddit, there's probably over 75,000 members on this so far.
It's my understanding that the results of any given remote viewing session, even ones that are particularly outstanding, are not perfectly accurate set of coordinates. The process itself is sort of mushy. There is the individual personality as almost an intermediary. Forget about the naming and judging mind that is also at play. If you're looking for specific lottery numbers or the exact coordinates of some secret hidden Russian missile base, you can get all kinds of very, very accurate details about that secret hidden missile base, but you're not going to necessarily be divine its exact location. Am I right? These results exist on a kind of a spectrum of accuracy, and you get parts of a picture, but do you always get the whole picture?
It's challenging because you really have to know your own mind. That's the thing about it. For remote viewing, you're almost getting out of your own way, putting that, hey, I know the answer kind of person or side of your mind aside so that you can focus on the data that's coming in. A very highly trained remote viewer who's done hundreds of targets over years knows what kind of imagination stuff is popping into their head versus what might be the signal. So it can happen over time that you can get very, very accurate. Location is challenging in remote viewing sometimes. Even Joe McMonagle, one of the top remote viewers in the world, will draw spectacular maps. I think he has a background in drafting. But they're often a mirror image of what actually is on the ground. That's very interesting. Like, why does he draw maps backwards through remote viewing? They're really good, and you can flip it over and see exactly what he's talking about. So it's never entirely perfect. It always filters through the person's personality, whoever's doing it. Some people are better at colors or sounds or sensations. You want to train professionals in remote viewing, because if you have a medical question, for instance, that you want an answer to, I might be able to tell you something about a particular body part, but not in the detail that's going to help somebody. So there are doctors, medical doctors, who have been trained in remote viewing and can do diagnoses through remote viewing. So
much of it is then about it being able to interpret the signal, whatever it is.
Yeah. So if you task me with like a nuclear plant, like, how does this work, Mark? I've got no idea. There's some sparkly things inside, but if you got a physicist, then you might get some real breakthroughs there,
To ping into current events that are related to gods, ghosts, and UFOs, I saw an interview, and I've forgotten her name, with apparently a very talented and experienced remote viewer who took a look at, this was back in August, took a look at 3i Atlas, which is the interstellar body that is coming our way.
Yeah.
And we've sort of avoided talking about. Dr. Avi Loeb at Harvard has a lot to say about it, possibly being, like he did with Oumuamua, possibly being some type of craft, some type of non-human intelligence, something. This woman was tasked with it, did a 2-day remote viewing session on it in August. Are you familiar with her and that session? In
Are you talking
I'm
about
not gonna-
Bertie Jarowski by chance?
Yeah,
Yes,
I
it's
am.
Bertie, yep.
What do you think about?
I haven't seen her session. She's an outstanding remote viewer, though. So I would
Well,
definitely...
what she said was, it is a natural formation. It's utterly huge, but it has some what she termed graffiti on it, and that some type of what we would understand as AI technology was placed inside of it that communicates in broadcasts, periodic broadcasts in the form of pulses, but also has its own personality. And she talked about how lonely it was, and that we would be able to understand what it was and what it did, but it would be a huge sort of conceptual and technological leap for us at the same time. She said that thing that was installed was about the size of a thumb drive, as if you put a thumb drive on the end of New York City, was how she described it. And of course, none of this is provable, is it? I don't think that we're going to
Not
get a
yet.
clear image of this thing, and even if we did, we wouldn't get one that clear. And
No.
maybe
We'd
some
be
big
able to
news
see
is
the
coming
thumb
our
drive.
way, but I was interested that she was a remote viewer and apparently quite reputable.
Is the episode you were listening to, Tom, on Neon Galactic with James Falk? Is that
Precisely so.
Yep. I would recommend that episode. It's
Yeah.
interesting, and she's and
she's
one of the
great.
things I've been so interested in too is that all the people that I've heard who have been the most compelling to me have been like just non-mystical. Like they're just like, oh yeah, I was doing this thing, and here's some stuff I found out. Kind of cool. What do you think? Like,
I was just going to say, you remember I mentioned feedback, getting shown the photograph afterwards. That's very important to sort of close the loop in remote viewing. Some people say, are you looking into the future to see the feedback photo, or are you actually going to the site? And I think you're often going to the site. But for something like the Atlas, thing moving through space, I don't know how much feedback you got there, right? I don't know if we're going to be able to find a thumb drive size thing in New York City somewhere. So
No way.
But Bertie has been doing this for several decades. She works at least 2 targets a day. She knows her mind, and she's probably got good data there.
She said the space was really hard.
Yeah.
That remote viewing
Makes
in space
sense.
was very, very difficult.
it's big. It's a big place.
Then that's
So
what she
far
said.
away.
It's big, cold, and lonely. She associates it with feelings and stuff. She's a really interesting character. I mean, she's a human being.
Wow.
But the way that she talks about it is just, like you were saying, Jordan, just very conversational. And, she's doing this sort of almost automatic writing thing where she's just scribbling away with one hand, which is sort of, she said, to keep her left mind busy, but also to create images. And then she'll go, a new perspective, and tear the sheet away and start making a new drawing. She's a fascinating character.
Yeah, it is fascinating to watch her sessions. She is extraordinary.
Now, of course, there are people who are more talented at this than others. You've mentioned some real standouts, people who are really, really good, and then people who are good at images or other sensory information, smells. But is it your position that to some degree, remote viewing abilities are available to everyone?
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Well, often at Stanford, they would have one of their sponsors come in from the intelligence agencies, right? Or somebody who's overseeing it. And they would say, I don't believe what you're doing here is real. And they would say, okay, well, rather than us do a session, we're going to make you do one. And they would sit them down and give them a target. And these people would often prove themselves to themselves that it worked, right? They'd have a good session. And they talk about the beginner effect, where maybe you don't know enough about remote viewing or don't believe it enough that your guard isn't all the way up like it is later, right? So often those first timers will have a really good session because they don't believe it. There's nothing on the line. They're like, this can't possibly be real. But then they do it. So everybody has some aspect to it. Now, everybody can play golf, right? I can swing a club. I'm not going to be Tiger Woods,
That's
right?
right.
Sure.
Because Tiger has worked his whole life doing it. And that's what makes the difference between everyday remote viewers and the outstanding ones. It's just that level of dedication and discipline that you have to put into practicing all the time, not being afraid to be wrong.
I would also suggest that Tiger Woods are born and not made. I know this as a musician, there are just, or as a live performer,
You have some
there are
some,
people who
some,
just got it.
like a basic foundation of
Yeah,
ability
yeah.
there, and then it's just a matter of developing it if you want.
Yeah, yeah.
Dean Radin has talked about that a lot. He basically says, like, yeah, there's, when it comes to any psi ability, there's natural talent and then there's practice. And if you combine both those things, you can wind up with people who have pretty remarkable abilities. My mind immediately went to, the countries that produce the best soccer teams are the ones who have the most young people playing soccer. The countries,
absolutely.
I mean, it makes sense. And so,
Quantity,
it seems like one of the reasons that we don't have more remarkable remote viewers is just because there aren't enough. It's just not in the sort of cultural water enough. Like, there's not enough people who are practicing it and doing it. And if
That's why we're
if
here.
you scaled that up by 10x, then you would see 10x more incredible. I mean, it would still be a small number, but it like really profound the sort of geniuses of remote viewing.
I was curious about earlier you mentioned people shilling remote viewing training. You kind of implied that there are people who are faking out there. And I was just curious, or you said they were doing something that wasn't remote viewing. And I was curious about what that was for what people could be looking out for.
Just give me a quick example. I'm a member of some of the UFO groups because I'm an experiencer myself. But every now and then, somebody like one of the admins of the group will say, "Okay, I want you to join us on our Zoom call this weekend. We're going to remote view the aliens." And I have to stop and say, "Okay, what is wrong with that particular statement?" Now, you probably already know, since I sort of described what you need to do or can't do in remote viewing, right? You've already front-loaded it. You've told everybody what you're going to be viewing. So whatever anybody comes up with is going to be wildly inaccurate. It has to be intentional, and you have to be blind to the target. And a lot of times when people are saying that they are a remote viewer, they're not doing those two things, right? There are a lot of people out there who aren't teaching what you think they're teaching is what I'm saying.
It's funny how much this conforms to scientific experimental protocols.
Yes.
You have to be blind. You have to do a double blind,
Right.
and not be given the answer before you perform the experiment. It's very interesting to me.
Right.
It feels like, back to the sort of collectivization of like, oh, I can do this. I feel like the KT boundary was the telepathy tapes, basically, where people are like, wait a minute, what is legitimately ours that we've been told isn't ours? And I think remote viewing just drops right into that basket very easily.
Yeah.
But when you get into the like, your own ego gets in the way, or you're receiving information that's not available through your five senses, or time does not flow in a linear fashion, like in like a straight arrow. I could see how that could be disturbing to some people, to where they maybe
Right.
don't want to. Jordan wants to try it, but like I could see how a lot of people would go like, "What door am I opening here?"
Yes, it's exactly right. I think that's one of the reasons why some people aren't really willing to accept it, because that's a door they don't want to open and consider. And it changes your worldview, honestly. Like, everything you think you've been told about how things work is just thrown out the window, essentially. So it is quite mind-blowing.
Can you talk to us about daily life as a remote viewer? How does this affect your practical, logical life?
Well, I am not doing a lot of viewing lately, but when I was big into it, it really spilled over into the rest of my life. So we talked about it being a muscle. It's a psychic muscle that got really exercised. So even when I wasn't sitting down and trying to work a target and being intentional and everything, I would get these insights during the day. Once I was working over on Centennial campus at NC State University, went out to the credit union at lunchtime, right? So I'm sitting there in line at the credit union, and all of a sudden I get really nervous, and my mind starts thinking, okay, this would be a good escape route. This would be where my getaway car would be. And I stopped myself and going, what am I thinking? This is odd. It's 2 p.m. in the afternoon, a sunny day. Nobody's around me. I don't feel threatened at all. I could not understand where that had come from. And so I got back to my desk, and I pull up the local news site, and I see that like minutes after I had been at that credit union, it got robbed in a violent robbery. Oh my God. And that was on my mind when I was there, and I had no clue as to happen. But that's what happens. You sort of tune into things, and you start to trust those little intuitive things that pop into your head.
And can we draw a line under that? I think the Mark Turner episode after the next Mark Turner episode is going to be weird that's happened to Mark Turner. So we should go ahead and pencil that one in. But can we draw a line under this, that that intuitive information that we have to learn to trust. It is not ever or in any way deceptive. Is that correct?
I would say you trust your gut far more than you normally would. Now, that doesn't mean that the information's right all the time. And here's the thing. I've done some remote viewing of events in the future, but it can be challenging because remember how I talked about your concept of time changes? A lot of people think that it is a linear progression from past to future, but the future is not set in stone. And so you're viewing one particular probability. And again, I could talk a whole episode about all this. But the thing is that you can be wrong about things. Like, for instance, if you got a premonition before you took a plane flight that the plane was going to crash and you were going to die, you decide not to take that particular flight. The plane crashes. Was your dream lying to you?
It makes me think of John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies, where Indrid Cold is talking about how there will be, a terrible event that happens on this day, but it's not the day that the terrible event happened. And maybe even what was the terrible event was going to be was slightly off. There's a lot of data in that kind of literature about sort of things being predicted to individuals that did not come to pass or didn't quite come to pass. And people are like, oh, it's a trickster element. But it could be that we just haven't collapsed that waveform yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I did my betting thing with ARV in Las Vegas, I started afterwards. I was like, did I influence the future? Did I just decide that this is going to be the outcome that I want? And that's something that you can chew on for days or weeks or months or years. Like, how did I choose a future there? It's fascinating to think about.
But aren't we choosing our future every day?
Every single moment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Every single moment. Yeah.
Would you say that these insights, especially when you were really flexing that muscle often, did they sort of flow like water, or was it something that you felt like you were doing? Like, was it stuff that would pop in and you'd find yourself tuned into the signal? Or would you ever say, I want to know this thing about my ex-wife or my...
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
You can't really chase it. You got to let it come to you. Thinking back on it, the times when I found that those things were popping in my head were often points where my mind was on idle. Like I just sort of shifted into neutral or something. I'd be like gardening or watching the snow fall out the window or something and not really thinking about anything in particular. And then, something would pop in. So
a meditative state.
Yeah, I guess so. Just being completely open to whatever popped into my head.
Did it happen in the shower? Everybody talks about creative ideas in the shower. I was just curious.
It could, certainly,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not thinking about anything in particular, absolutely.
Or mowing the yard.
Yeah, mowing the yard.
Get a lot of work done mowing the yard.
Yeah, but gardening for me is one thing because, again, your hands are doing something busy that they have to do, and then your mind has its opportunity to be open to things. I think that's really the key to it.
They always say that Einstein did his best work while he was at the patent office. It feels so connected to creativity. I mean, you made that connection for us early on in this conversation, but it just feels like an extension of that. And I think most people who create, write, music, paint, whatever, will relate to what you're describing, which is almost like you tap into a signal and suddenly there's a thing that exists now. And talk about creating the future. It's like, well, sometimes you create a future where you're an established artist all of a sudden because you don't know how this happened, but it came out of you. And it feels like we're on a spectrum of this already. We're just moving maybe further down the spectrum as a collective, possibly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to point out another really interesting thing about remote viewers is that some of the best ones are synesthetes. So
I bet. Yeah.
Their sense of senses in their head is a little bit not cross-wired necessarily because it's not a bad thing, but Joe McMoneagle and some of the other ones, the really good viewers, just seem to have that habit, as does my daughter. It was kind of funny when she told us once when she was probably about 12 years old that she has colors associated with letters, for instance. And it was shocking to her that didn't happen to everybody. So, which is funny because you just assume that everybody thinks like you, and then you find out, no, that's not quite the way. But I think it has something to do with that mixing of senses in your mind that just sort of makes them a little bit better at it.
You mentioned that you used to be way more into it and you did it a lot more and it started to bleed into your everyday. Can I ask why the change?
I went through basic training with Paul H. Smith. He does basic control remote viewing training. It's a very demanding course, a week of like 12-hour days, a lot of writing. And to take it to the next level would start bringing in some more serious kind of stuff. So, for instance, I've got friends who use remote viewing operationally. So they're solving crimes, violence, murder, and it can be very challenging because it's not just the images that come to you. It's not just viewing. It is the colors and senses and smells, emotions. I've got a friend who put himself in the place of somebody who got stabbed and knows what it's like to die of stabbing. And I don't know if I can handle that. I don't know if I could handle getting tasked with trying to find a kid who's being abused and locked up in somebody's cellar.
Yeah.
That is, I don't know if I got the fortitude to go through with that, but that's kind of what the next level of training will get you to, people who can do that, God bless them, and there are people, remote viewers, who are like the only lifeline to these people, these kids or whatever, the only person who can solve these crimes. And the balance of that is that, on the other hand, you're helping people out, and I have a strong sense of doing that, but I don't know if I've got the stomach for dealing with some of the crazy stuff there, because it's not just like looking at images. Often you can feel everything that your subject is feeling. It can get really intense.
Is there metadata on successful remote viewing in everyday life, not just in controlled, laboratory or clinical trials, but like people do work with law enforcement, right? But is there any data that we can access, or is it just a thing where law enforcement won't really talk about it? They got somebody on speed dial. When they've hit a wall, they'll call in somebody and go like, help, we're having trouble, or they just have a working relationship. Has any remote viewing evidence been submitted in a court of law?
Not in a court of law. My friend Pam Coronado has worked extensively with police departments, over dozens of them over the years. And like you said, it's always going to be a case where the police department reaches out to her. Everyday psychics will often try to submit stuff, and so that never works out well for anybody. But if the police have somebody that they've worked with before, has a track record, they'll very quietly reach out to them and do the work. But Pam has gotten a lot of that stuff documented. She's been on TV helping solve crimes. And I think you see some testimony from the detectives in those cases who will say, yeah, we weren't able to do it without her. But what she does, she finds evidence that they can use in court.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it works. But I don't think you can probably accept any of that as anything but hearsay in a court. So
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Sure.
If that. Yeah. Fascinating.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, Mark.
Can I have the privilege of asking the last question
Please.
For now.
for this episode?
I'll come back. Okay, I'll come back
no.
if you want me.
Oh,
All right.
we'll have you back. We'll have you back. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
the lucid dreaming stuff is going to be pretty important, pretty high on our list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you stated you don't believe that there's really any such thing as secrets. And that's a big deal. That's a very powerful, sort of world-changing, paradigm-shifting statement. And I think it's one ultimately that is that's strong sauce. I don't really know how else to say it.
That's fine.
And I think it's good. And I think that that's something to which we should be progressing personally and collectively. So, for you personally, what are some of the mysteries or secrets that you would most love to discover with your own practice of remote viewing?
Well, I like political intrigue, so there might be some things about that I might go explore. Secrets of the universe, certainly, like our origin might be nice. I would love to be able to put my skills to use in helping solve some problems for humanity. I am also a geek, so some kind of better way of generating energy might be helpful. I've often thought about that, or transportation or something. How can I come up with something like that? Air conditioning or something like that. Just sort of task yourself like, what would be a better way of doing this? And then just being open to whatever you get.
It's great.
I mean, that's really beautiful stuff.
Can I touch on something that Jordan brought up about secrets and everything?
Yeah.
It sounds a little scary right now, but I have a really, really finely tuned BS detector, largely because of remote viewing and trusting my intuition. Imagine a world
Right on.
where there are no secrets, where people can't con you or scam you or take advantage of you. You know their intentions right offhand. No wars, no cheating, no swindles, nothing like that would ever exist anymore. People would be able to connect with each other on a level that they don't connect now. So think about that kind of world that might be on its way. To me, that's pretty exciting.
I couldn't agree more. I heard once, and maybe it was on the telepathy tapes, that you cannot lie telepathically. It's simply not possible.
Yep.
And if that's the case, and if that information that is, we call it subconscious, whatever you want to call it, whatever vehicle or medium or substrate through which that information is available to us, that information in the form of our intuition and gut is honest. And therefore, the more we are in touch with that, the more honest we are going to be able to be with ourselves and each other. And then that leads to a better world.
Yep.
That was going to be my question, Mark. I was going to ask you what a world in the future with remote viewing being extremely prevalent, if not fully prevalent, would look like. And you answered it without me asking it, which makes me feel like the world would be a little bit like that.
Could be, right. We might just had a demonstration here. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's all go bet on the lottery and see what happens.
All right. Yeah.
The next episode will be much different.
Much better production values. Really lots of bells and whistles. Mark, thanks a million.
Seriously.
Sure thing. I've
So
enjoyed
much
chatting with
time.
y'all. Yeah.
Couple of quick reminders before you go. First off, if you haven't left a rating on your platform of choice, please do that. One of the first things people look at when they're judging a show by its cover is the number of ratings it has. So if you dig what we're doing, show it with stars. Also, he didn't have to, but Mark decided to stick around for our epilogue. And to be honest, I think the conversation got even more interesting. We talk about how aphantasia might make Tom better at remote viewing, Mark's belief that some non-human intelligences are master hypnotists, and why people claiming contact with angels or aliens or whatever might actually be getting catfished by trickster entities. If you want to hear it, go to godsghostsufos.com or find the link in the description. See you next week, friends.